I'm Lyle, Alenstein of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and the Daily Collegian, joined here by Joel Haas of statecollege.com. No Isaiah today, but I'm sure as all of you listeners remember, we were doing this a season ago, so happy to have Joel back. And today, Joel, Penn State had a result that it did not want. Nobody really entered the season thinking that UCLA was going to be a trap game in any capacity, and then especially with the turnover that this coaching staff has had, how it started 0-4. Nobody really thought the Bruins had any chance entering this game today, but it was exactly that. Penn State did fall to the UCLA Bruins by a score of 42-37. Lots to digest in this one. I'm just going to throw you the lob. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, I think this is probably the most surprising result I've seen since I've covered the team. I mean, you mentioned it a little bit earlier, but when you look at the schedule preseason, obviously you circle Ohio State and Oregon. Those are the two big ones, right? And then you look at maybe, hey, Indiana could be a trap game. Iowa on the road, Kinnick's a tough place to play. Maybe that's a trap game. Nobody circled UCLA on the schedule, and especially with how they started the season, obviously going 0-4. They were losing to group of 5 teams, and then Penn State, number 7, comes in here, and UCLA gets his first win. I guess keys for UCLA, Nico Iamaleava, close enough, right?
Yeah, I got
Give me credit for that one. Great game. He set a career high in rushing yards. He was also extremely efficient passing the ball. I think UCLA, here's the thing. We talked about the coaching turnover earlier. Despite the coaching turnover, UCLA now, I believe, has a different head coach, offensive coordinator, and defensive coordinator from the start of the season. And I think UCLA outcoached Penn State.
100%.
And I think it was evident from start to finish. You talk about that onside kick right after UCLA's first touchdown of the game. That's coaching right there. They noticed something on film that they would be able to exploit, executed it well. You got to give, obviously, the players credit for executing, but I think game plan, UCLA knew Nico's probably not going to have a ton of time in the pocket, so how do you counter that? You do a lot of short passes, and then you get him active with his legs. Penn State just couldn't contain him either, on the ground or through the air today.
Yeah, I want to hit on a couple of those points. Nico, you got to shout out him for what he did today. This is a guy
looked like a 5-star.
Obviously, he was a great player on the Tennessee team last year that ended up making the playoffs, and then had that big, off-season controversial thing where he ended up transferring to the Bruins after some NIL, speculations with the issue that was going on there. Struggled to start the season. I mean, this is an 0-4 UCLA team. Obviously, you could point out other factors we just talked about. Played great today. Looked like a 5-star. Why he was so highly touted coming out of high school. 120-something yards on the ground. Through the air, looked really good. He took over this game, but you hit on it. This defensive line could not stop him on the ground with his legs. You look at these linebacker issues that we've had all season. The first game, Tony Rojas, and you could tell that they were missing him. He was probably going to be that quarterback spy. He could not get it. The defense struggled all day. The defensive line just ran over. And I think you point at the defensive line, you point at not having Tony Rojas. But when you overall point at this defense, Jim Knowles, they spent $3.1 million this offseason to bring him in from Ohio State. And this is a UCLA team that its season high in points before this game was 23 against UNLV. It's still a loss. And the Bruins put up over 450 yards of total offense today. I think that says something. And the defense has not really been an issue for the most part.
They were great
this whole season. And then you just get ran and thrown all over. Offense, fell behind early overall collectively as a team, 27-7. These fast starts. Saw it last week against Oregon. Saw it again today. They're harming this team.
I do find it interesting that Penn State's offense, especially these last couple years, seems to kick it into high gear once it's down by multiple scores. I was kind of looking at the numbers a little bit earlier, but you look at the USC game last year. Penn State falls down by 14 points earlier in that game, and then the offense comes to life. Obviously, they come back to win that game in overtime. Drew Aller played one of his best games, and it came after they were down by 14. Same thing, Big Ten championship game last year against Oregon. Penn State was behind, I think, 18 points in the first half of that one. Drew Aller turns it on, has one of his best games of his career. Same thing last week against Oregon. They fall down 17-3 in the fourth quarter. Looks like the game's over. All of a sudden, Drew Aller turns it on. The offense gets going. 2 touchdowns to tie the game, another touchdown in overtime. Today, they go down 10-0 before the offense even takes a snap. Offense actually looked pretty good for Penn State today. Not that it means much in the end because they ultimately lost the game. But I just find it interesting that they get off to these slow starts, but then once they go down by multiple scores, they turn it on. It's almost like they open up the playbook and unlock something. They get a little bit more aggressive, which is what people want to see from the offense. If they could just do that out of the gate, I think they'd have a lot more success. Maybe could have won today, maybe could have won against Oregon last week. I think you have to take a long look in the mirror if you're Penn State. You have to look at what Kotelnicki's done this year with the offense and the struggles they've had, and you have to be honest with yourselves. It hasn't looked good, and maybe some changes need to be made. I mean, I don't want to speculate about jobs and things like that, but I think you have to do something differently, because obviously these two losses and the way they happened the last 2 weeks were pretty inexcusable for Penn State.
Yeah, you talked about Nico Iamaleava. I just think it's interesting how this offense has not matched the production that it had last year. And then with the slow starts, turning up is great late in the game if you're able to pull out the win and see something. But what hasn't changed from Nico Iamaleava is some of this play calling. Last week, some of these, 3rd and 9 option runs, dialing up these screen passes, throws behind the line of scrimmage. You saw Trevor Pena today get blown up on multiple occasions. And, I'm not pointing a finger at Drew Aller on this one. He's always the subject of criticism after a majority of these losses, especially with, the background, the track record of those game-stealing interceptions. Not on him today. Roughly around the 70% mark, 2 touchdowns through the air. He looked great with his legs, Lamar Alar. Yeah. But Kotelnicki, when you're 4th and 2, that option play at the end of the game where it's not the call. Dial something up in the middle. The running backs, short yardage situation, you look at them, they're supposed to be the best running back duo in the country, arguably. They're not there. You've been talking about this. You've been hammering this for the last couple of weeks. Katron Allen is not getting the ball enough. Mm-hmm. And it's just things like that this team is just little things. It's the infamous James Franklin quote after losing to AP top 10 teams. It's little things that make the plane crash. A lot of things made the plane crash over this stretch, and this is a team now 4-2 on the year, and it's got obviously Northwestern coming up, which was supposed to be it was supposed to be a bye game, which as this one was, and it's just, where do you think this team is at going forward? Obviously, they're probably going to plummet in the AP poll. Are they still going to be ranked? We don't know, but just what is the outlook of this team moving forward, coming off of today, where you're flying back across the country, back to State College, arguably not happy. James Franklin said this week it was a good time to get out of town, but I don't know, it's now might be a bad time to get back in town.
Yeah, well, we've gone through 6 weeks of the season, and Penn State still has not beaten a power conference opponent, which is pretty embarrassing for a team that, was ranked number 7 today, obviously didn't look like it, and may or may not have a number next to its name when it hosts Northwestern next week. And I don't think Penn State deserves to be ranked, quite frankly, given the body of work that we've seen. Just questionable play calling, and it just seems like the team is so hesitant to change what it's doing and, to change its plan from week 1 and adjust, frankly. Obviously everyone was expecting Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, 1A, 1B, but when you list Penn State's running backs, everyone says Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. They don't say Katron Allen and Nick Singleton. And the plan coming into the season was obviously that, Nick would get slightly more touches than Katron and obviously be more involved in the passing game. We've seen every single week that Katron is doubling Nick up in yards per carry and yet getting fewer carries. Lyle mentioned it briefly, but today Nick had 8 carries, Nick had 11 carries, Katron had 8. And Katron was averaging, I think, around 6 or 7 yards per carry. Obviously, you want to feed him the ball when it's working. UCLA's run defense is actually, pretty decent, considering, how bad the team has looked through the first 4 weeks. That was something that I noted going into the game. But regardless, when you have Singleton averaging 2 yards per carry week after week after week, and you just don't make a change and you're still giving him more touches than you give to Katron Allen, you have to kind of raise red flags. You have to be able to look at that and say, all right, a change needs to be made. You could say the same thing at several other positions. You could even look at quarterback and say, after how Drew has struggled at times, why is the staff so hesitant to turn to Grunkemeyer? Could he be worse than Drew was for 3 quarters against Oregon? It's the staff is so hesitant to make these adjustments. And going back to that spy thing, right? Obviously, fans on Twitter were calling for Penn State to use a spy because Nico's running all over them. Iamaleava leaving them in the dust, right? And fans wanted a spy there. James Franklin was asked that question. One of the first questions he got after the game said they did try the spy on a few occasions. I do remember seeing, I think Denai Dennis-Sutton got maybe 2 snaps as the spy, and then Amari Campbell had a snap as the spy. I think that was it, but Franklin was saying that they didn't like what they saw during those plays. Nico was still able to break free from the spies, which for the most part is true. And we spoke to Amari Campbell after the game. He took the blame for that, was very adamant that it was his fault, but you got to do something. If you're not going to do a spy, you have to either load the box or you have to try a different player, maybe bring Kenny Mack down to be the spy. Don't have a defensive end spying one of the most mobile quarterbacks in college football. Just my thoughts. I think you just have to try more things, be more open to change. And I think that's kind of been an issue throughout Franklin's tenure when you look at, keeping in Sean Clifford instead of giving Will Levis a shot, things like that. He's almost loyal to a fault with a lot of his guys, and now we're seeing it with Singleton and Allen, possibly Aller, who obviously had a great day today, so you don't want to put the blame on him, but maybe against the Oregon game they could have switched up. So I think you just have to do some self-evaluation here and be willing to make changes when necessary. And I think that's what lost Penn State the game. Obviously, defense did not play well, but I think ultimately it falls on the coaches, both for getting the team ready to play, but then also game management. I think you gotta blame the coaches for this one. There's no other way about it.
Yeah, obviously a lot to unpack from this one for Penn State. They're going to go home across the country not happy, as are their fans all across the nation. And moving forward, this team, you argue they win out, they can make the college football playoff, but that is looking like a tough task right now. And that's a keyword being argue. They can win out and still not make the playoff. But moving forward, they've got Iowa on the road. You've got Indiana at Beaver Stadium, traveling in Columbus where they haven't beat the Buckeyes since 2011. So a lot of adjustments that are going to have to move forward, and this team is going to have to do. And they're going to have to do them real quick. But other than that, that'll be it here from Pasadena, California, the Roseville Stadium. This was both of our first trips here. Quite an experience. We're gonna try to catch the sunset shortly. But that's all we have for today. We'll see you guys next time back at Beaver Stadium for a 3:30 kick against Northwestern.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.